Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. Now, when you come and find us on the various podcast platforms, you're only going to see Lighting the Candle, but we're going to have an inside joke that we're lighting the candle for a world that works and starting it here and passing it to you. So it's been really kind of an interesting COVID situation for the last year. I want to say our very first recording might have been sometime, late spring, early summer. But since then, we've had lots of time, to have conversations back and forth around the whole domain of empowerment and having people's lives work just strictly, from conversation and the things that come out of your mouth. So we're going to try something just a little bit different today. And I'm Bill Carell. I still am, I always have been, and hopefully I pretty much always will be. And that being the case, I would like to hand it off while I'm changing the name on the screen. Vanessa, would you be kind enough to kind of give us an intro and let us know the selection of the topic word for this week, please?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, welcome to the podcast. So glad you're with us. Bill and I had a conversation last week, and it kind of goes off of every time we bring up a podcast topic. It usually, I don't know if it's just coincidence but it usually ends up being something to do with the letter E, a word that starts with the letter E. There's a lot of great words that begin with the letter E, and especially a lot of words that would pertain to the things that we talk about on this podcast every week. So, for example, there was one podcast where we discussed 3 E's, and I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, they were enlightenment, empowerment, and encouragement. And we wanted to talk about, and maybe there was a 4th E, engagement, but we wanted to talk about kind of how those all sort of meld together and they maybe feed into one another, and as pertaining to how we operate in the world. How do we engage others in maybe having tough conversations, for one example, or how do we educate, what gives us enlightenment and inspiration? I know that's not a word that begins with the letter E, but and generally, so just going along those lines. So anyway, so we thought, well, let's try this. And I was tasked with the duty of putting together a list of words that begin with the letter E. And so I've come up with, I think at least 25 words. And so we have a lot to work off with. And, maybe if we were to use 1 or 2 of those E words every week and just see how everybody's own personal experiences pertain to the topic and what we can all contribute on the podcast. So this week, when we were searching for a topic, I came up with the word edification. And I will share that we do each take turns. Usually Bill is the one who chooses the topic, but we do each take turns. Each person on the podcast getting to choose a word. So edification, I could tell you that there's some synonyms. Maybe some people think of the word edification as, maybe how we're educated, but it's a little bit more than that. I know some synonyms or near synonyms for edification. I have a list in front of me, and I'll just read it off to you. Are culture, enlightenment, improvement, education, knowledge, learning, literacy, maybe even scholarship. And again, these are getting further away from the actual word's definition, but because we've even got reading and bookishness. But then we come back to awareness, consciousness, realization, absorption, assimilation, digestion, uptake, appreciation, apprehension. And I'll stop there. So what I get from that list is that edification is I know I've heard it very often used in the spiritual context, and before I go farther, Bill, did I go past the introduction? Do you want me to leave it off there so you can continue?
I'm going to
Or do you want me to
reiterate
continue with what
I'll reiterate one of the fundamental rules of this podcast. You cannot do it wrong. Okay. The only way you can do it wrong is if you're not having fun. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong. But other than that, you're killing it. Okay.
Okay, great. So I just didn't want to talk and talk and talk and talk. I didn't know if you just wanted me to give the introduction and then leave it there. So
sure. You're welcome to pass the baton anytime it feels natural.
Okay, sounds good. So I'd like to share a little bit how I came up with the topic. So like I had mentioned, I hear it used a lot in I mentioned spiritual circles, but and again, one of the synonyms was enlightenment, which is like a higher education. It's like and I like that one of the synonyms was absorption. So it's like, to me it sounds like something that goes into, seeps down into the soul. And I think that would go for any kind of learning, but when it's learning that's like an experiential learning, or something that maybe helps take your mindset, for example. I know we talk about that on the podcast a lot, from a fixed to a growth mindset, for example. I think that it's a really powerful word. And I'm a member of a Christian church, and I know that our pastor uses this term a lot. He says edification, and what is being used to edify, and then he uses the synonym for that is building up. So how are we in the church case? It would be, how are we building up the congregation? What are we sharing or teaching them to build up their knowledge? And I guess that would mean spiritual knowledge, which can mean life knowledge. And then also, how are we, but then taking it out into the world also, how are we building up children, for example? I know Ken works a lot with children. How are we building up the children? How are we edifying them? How are we helping them to absorb everything they're learning? And maybe it's through the different processes that are used in the learning, like if it's an experiential process or kinesthetic, or just being aware of all the different ways that people learn or children would learn. So but I like the term building up. So how are we building up ourselves? And maybe it pertains to more than spiritual. Maybe it's, how are we building up ourselves, in life? What experiences are we learning from, and what are those experiences coming from? And then I remember one of the questions I asked was where do we look to be edified? So I will leave it there. So thank you.
Great work. What do you do for a living again?
I am a freelance writer. I've done marketing copywriting, but I'm a freelance writer, and the subjects I love to write about are sustainability, spirituality, and the human condition.
You're also a black belt researcher, and thank you very much for setting.
So I love what we talk about.
Yeah.
On the podcast. Yep.
Good. So who would like to go next?
Lisa.
Lisa, is that a term you use very much? Edification or edify or?
No, not really. And I am, even in my spiritual world, I don't hear it that much either. It's a good word. And there are a lot of synonyms for it. And I'm sure people are doing it and just not even are aware of it. I think when she said absorb, I like that term too. Going through once I got into a spiritual and motivational self aspect, I just observe. I kind of absorbed what I listened to. And when I did look it up, there's a triangle for edification, which is you, a friend, and an expert. So I think regarding the expert, most people are doing that all the time, whether it's reading a book or, especially in this Zoom world, it's interviewing an expert so that the rest of the audience can. So that also, so you invite the expert, that makes you look like, that builds up trust, which is another part of edification, and it enlightens your audience, proves that you are have trust, or at least the ability to bring experts on to help people. So edification, I think either reading a book, that's how I basically started, and then going places, listening to lectures. Traveling can even be edification. There's a way to learn from everything. I think the other aspect of it is people that, and there's everybody has them in their lives where they are stuck, they are, and they just say, this is how I am, or I don't know how to change that. And in fact, in my own family, there's a communication issue going on. And I said, well, I have this book, let's read it together. And the person's husband doesn't read. So I said, well, let's read it out loud and then discuss it. So there's ways to improve people, or even if they have blocks up, seeing that they're not looking ways to improve it, just staying stuck where they are. So I think that's where the world is hurting right now, is because everybody's either staying stuck or getting mad in their stuckness and trying to convince others to their way of thinking. But so there's so many ways to use that word and apply it. But that's my 2 cents.
Ken, do you have anything? I'll jump in if you don't.
Go ahead, jump in first. I'm still absorbing.
So here's the interesting part of this. I actually first became aware of the word edification in conversations with a very good friend of mine, and in the context of an MLM that we were working on, and multi-level marketing partnership that we had. And her favorite, she's a scientist. This woman is a degreed scientist and has been working in various cancer fields most of her adult life, and decided to quit a job with a pharmaceutical company about 7 or 8 years ago and working on this business. So I told you that story to tell you this one. She used the word edify and edification quite a lot. And English is her second language. She was born Chinese, and she actually immigrated to the United States in her late teens. And what she had to teach me what edification was, because I had read it in scientific journals, but I hadn't heard it. That word's not used in either the Catholic Church all that much as I was raised, or necessarily in the Episcopalian Church either. They had other words that were very much similar, but what they're talking about here is actually, it's the action of instructing and improving someone, especially in moral and religious knowledge, with the idea that it's uplifting, which makes it and puts it in the domain of having a conversation about what something is and what something isn't. Okay, so when you are edifying, you're basically taking a conversational approach, as we do every week here with different words, and we start to talk about what they are in our own life and give expressions of that. But the whole idea of edification is when there are two people and one person has more mastery in the definition of a particular domain or topic or word, that they are imparting definitions, they are imparting similes and metaphors and all of those sorts of things, so that the other person has an understanding. And then when they are completely edified, they're able to recreate that complete edification with the person who has been instructing them. Very powerful. This is one of those ways that you get to be able to pass verbally cultural and iconic conversations that may or may not be explicit when you see them in the printed word. Okay. So, for example, if we take the domain of theology for a moment, a person who is very much interested in what does all of this mean? What do the verses and the chapters in the Bible mean to us in our living world? There are thousands of theologians that have written over the last 2,000 years with regard to what all of that has to do with. And so somebody who is a master at this is seeking edification by going to the library a lot and constantly looking for more, subtle distinctions, more innuendo or in inference that they can take away and start to really feel it as a living, breathing part of their own life. That way, when they're speaking to other people, these are people that really care about sharing the word and not sharing their opinions or their own charisma, in my opinion. So edification is a great word. It's an opportunity for people in groups. And I see that there's also part of the definition or a similar word would be pedagogy or pedagogy. I don't know who you listened to when you heard the word the first time. I understand both of them are correct pronunciations. So the point is that if there is an idea that is being put out for the first time, you would have heard these types of conversations going on in the 1960s with lots of ministers, with lots of people who were trying to inspire groups of people to think in a different way than they ever had before. But I think the word edification has implicit in it that it's for good. It is about uplifting. And I'm seeing unstable internet over here. So, Ken, anything? Ken, anything?
Yeah, we're losing you.
Yeah. Sorry, I think your connection was breaking up a little bit, so we were catching like part words. Uh-oh, I think he's frozen.
No, I'm still here.
Bill has frozen.
All right.
Oh, you're still here. Okay. Your face is frozen.
That's not a bad.
Go forward,
Ken.
Ken.
Not a bad way to go.
There we go.
So the last words that I said were, I think it's mostly about it's a good thing. Okay, it's really not about convincing or mind control or anything of that nature. It's more about getting to a flat surface in terms of understanding, what something means. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because well, you know me. Most of these words they're just a tool. So so how it's utilized, there's intention that's going to determine that. So and it's kind of interesting as you guys were talking, I was reflecting on an experience I had yesterday. I participated in this pitch event. So I was pitching the Quester's Way concept, and there were several other people who were pitching their concepts as well. And there was one gentleman who came from this yoga background, and we were all kind of unclear on exactly what he was doing, other than, he seemed to have some kind in the world. And he's talking about doing it through books and doing it through this and that, and how he's got it all developed and it's all in place. And what was interesting about it was he was being asked questions that were very respectful to just simply understand what it was he was saying. And his responses were very kind of curt and almost frustrated with our inability to just understand what he is seeing so clearly. So in this case, there was almost it was really interesting to me, because here's someone who was coming from a place of this kind of Taoist, spiritual, holistic, enlightened place, which, from the mentors that I've had, generally speaking, if someone's telling you how enlightened they are and your job is to catch up, they're probably not actually there. So, and it's not, I'm sure that what he was doing was really amazing. It was interesting. The place he came from was like this top-down approach of, I have information and your job is to understand it. And, as opposed to me, like, the real value I've experienced in teaching is when the edification occurs in a multi-dimensional way where everyone learns, through the process. Even if you're the one that has the information that you're sharing or the wisdom that you're sharing, you end up better for it on the other end. So, so I think that there's an interesting question that you can ask when you're in the process of thinking about edification. It's, who am I and who are they? And before you start, who am I going to be right now? Am I someone that's going to lecture and tell them the way it is? Or am I someone that's going to share, like some information that might be useful while also being aware and awake to how they receive that and what they return back to me that may actually change and evolve my own view at the same time. Make sense?
That may actually be going into another set of words, where the responsibility and where there's actually edification taking place is when the speaker is instructing and it's being understood by the other person. So this word has a kind of a really cool, and by all means, Vanessa, jump in if you disagree. This has kind of a cool meaning to it, in which it's like two friends talking to each other. And the first question that comes from the edifier is, what do you want to know? As opposed to diving in and, what do you think you know about this topic? Okay, well, that's pretty good. And how about this? So in terms of edifying, there may already be some understanding there, but it may not be complete and whole. And the job of the edifier is to give it three dimensions and to give it a reality and a palpability that person can then walk away. And that old conversation, what is it? Show me and I forget, or tell me and I forget, show me and I don't remember, or whatever it is. And then the third one is have me do it and I understand, So the process of edification, I think, is at that level where there's an exchange going on and real active listening on the part of the person being edified, as opposed to lecturing or instructing for no purpose. It's the whole idea is to uplift and add value to the person that you're speaking with.
Yeah, I like that you said add value, because I love how Lisa said it's like absorbing versus observing, and what she's trying to do, when she's learning something is rather, and I think she was speaking from a spiritual perspective too, but or just in general, rather than observing, she's working on absorbing it. And I think that goes for any learning. I like how Ken had mentioned the multi-dimensional approach to learning. I think that's definitely the best way to absorb it. And then the definition that I had always grown up with, I don't know, maybe the Greek word for edification is build up, but is to build up. So, and Bill, you're talking about edification, no matter what, it's being used as something good, and something good will come out of it. So I think my opinion, based on everything that everyone shared, I love this conversation, and thank you for allowing me to bring this topic to the podcast today, is that knowledge is so valuable, and it can be obtained in so many different ways. And so if we think of edification as the way of sharing knowledge, which is one thing that is shared to bring up whatever knowledge we want to impart in someone. And by knowledge, though, again, I love going back to what Lisa said about absorbing. I mean, it's more than just listening to a lecture. It's more than just watching something on the screen. It's more than just hearing something from a speaker. You're actually, the different ways that we might absorb some knowledge. And by knowledge, I don't mean to just put that in a box. That building up is all about obtaining knowledge. Certainly not. I'm thinking of knowledge as a more well-rounded, again, like, an experience now that we have a memory to draw on, as well as some wisdom that's imparted to our lives, so that we do something different going forward, or I mentioned before, our mindset changes, or our heart changes, or any of the above. That's just to define how I consider knowledge in the context of what is edifying us.
So here's a fun one. It was a conversation I had Monday. It's interesting. I have many conversations that align with this week, which is kind of cool. I was talking with someone about instilling a desire to be a lifelong learner, and I was talking with someone who's a very Zen individual, and has studied a lot, and their comment was, we already are lifelong learners. By nature, we can't not be. And he said, behind the clouds, the sun is always shining. And it was kind of interesting, because even anyone listening right now, you're learning. You're hearing things that you haven't heard in this way before. So there's a process of edification that's always occurring. We just don't necessarily remember that or notice it, as consciously. And it just struck me, there's a phrase we like to use that has helped us both in the learning process and in the teaching process, is the idea of mental alchemy. So, something new comes in, and then it mixes. It takes a few minutes, or it could take a year or whatever, but it mixes with all of the things that you've already experienced, all of who you are, all of the stuff that's come in, and something new is created. And if you're on the teaching side, the goal is to be patient. And once that new element has been introduced to the learner, give it space, and then be curious about what comes out. What's the new thing that's just been created, and when you're the learner, it's giving yourself space to not act or push back with what you already know, but let the new thing in enough that it can mix and move into something new. So I always liked that idea of mental alchemy as a way to just kind of remind ourselves to be patient, whoever we are in the edification process, and allow things to kind of, evolve, because we are always learning. So that process is ongoing till we die. It's kind of a cool way of thinking of it, I thought.
Yeah, until you get strapped to a morphine drip, whichever comes first, right?
Yeah.
Lisa?
No, I was thinking we could go to the A words now: alchemy, absorption.
Mm-hmm.
But
assimilation. That's especially when you're working with
there you go.
Extraordinary vessel work, especially in the yin way. You talk about that a lot, assimilation, and how things are separate within us, and it's that assimilation of these things inside and outside that creates a balanced, holistic person. Yeah, that's another good A word.
And I like how you said, or talk about, well, the alchemy is cool. But now I lost my train of thought. But my other train of thought was going to be in this modern world, this modern Zoom world, because when you're there with an expert at first, and these small breakout rooms give you the chance to talk in a smaller group and assimilate, or absorb or express yours and layer it into what you already know, like you were saying, you know, and then come out with something completely different or your own. And then you go back to the bigger group and some people share. So, that's what I was thinking. I love how you're saying we're always learning. I mean, we were born lifelong learners, and that's how we will always be. So
Yeah.
that was kind of cool. In this modern world I think we're constantly learning of new ways to find that new source for our new word here.
Yeah, I constantly go back to thinking about the great duos in history where cultural essence is being passed from one generation to the next. You know, and I think about Plato and Socrates, and I think about Bruce Lee and his mentor in China, and the fact that he could come to the United States and create all the things that he did was because he became the teachings of his master. He actually took on the values of all of the work that they did together. And I think of that in terms of the mentors that I've had in my life, where I asked them questions about business over the last 40 years. And the answer that they gave me was from their own personal experience, and not necessarily the teachings of someone else, but every once in a while, it would be a gem that was being passed on from a mentor that they had 25, 30 years earlier. So all of that said, we're coming to the top of our hour here, and I'm hoping that you can hear what I'm saying. But is there anybody else who has something to kind of wrap things up here before we move on to the second segment?
I have a question to start the second segment.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you at home for listening. We'll be back on the flip side with more interesting conversation for your enjoyment.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.